worst gig ever. The worst gig I ever did. I'll give you a couple, and you can pick. You can pick what one you want to use.
Worst gig ever. Oh god damn. Oh man, I have so many.
Worst gig ever.
Ooh, the list goes on.
Worst gig ever.
Oh, worst gig ever, man. That's a deep pool. Years ago, myself and 3 other comics were invited to perform in between fights at an MMA competition out on a First Nations reserve in North Vancouver. And like we did comedy in the ring, in between fights. So like as a kind of just to keep the audience focused, tell jokes in the middle of this ring. It was just it was the perfect storm of a terrible gig. And when I went in the ring, everybody's really strong, and they make separating those ropes look really easy, but they're really strong. And so I got halfway through and the ropes snapped shut, and I fell into the ring, and a bunch of bikers who were in the front row started like elbowing each other and saying, "This guy's hilarious." So I won them over, but it was just terrible, man. It was a terrible, terrible gig. But we got paid in cash, which was nice.
Okay, I did a show in Fresno, California, which is my hometown, and it was for a UFC event. It was outdoor at the AAA park, and man, there was supposed to be 30 fights. There were 2 fights, and then there was a comedy act that they weren't ready for. And it was an outdoor event, and I walked down, and it was like Russell Crowe and Gladiator. You walk down this pit, and I was doing the jokes in an octagon. People were laughing, they're loving it, and then the news chopped it together and said, "Oh, the downtown disaster." It said the show was horrible, or they said the event was a failure, and it said until this vulgar, it said, and if that wasn't as bad, this vulgar comic came on and cussed everyone out, and they cut my stuff together, and this is a true story, they cut it together, and they show me, and I'm responding to a heckler, and I said to the heckler, I go, "See now, if you're gonna be racist, be creative." Like, it was during Mel Gibson when he had that thing. I said, like, Mel Gibson, he was racist, but he was creative. And then so they just cut it together where I go, "I love racism." Like, it just looked like I was campaigning for the worst stuff. And I was kind of buff then for no reason, so I just look crazy. I don't look like I did comedy. I look like a guy in the crowd grabbed the mic and just was like, "Yeah, now," and then they, as they're doing the expose, then they cut to me. You know when they're not even showing your voice, but they cut to your action, and I said something, I go, "Ha," and I slap somebody, like I give someone a high five in the crowd. I'm like, "Yeah," and I'm just like, I look crazy. It was the worst show ever. It was the worst show ever. Then that's my hometown, so there was like a backlash. It was a big thing. I had to come out with a news response. And I was like, at the end of it, I had to say, "I love Mexicans," and I was like, "What?" There was nothing racist I did.
My worst gig ever, and this is a part of my story that doesn't really get told that often. Because when people ask me how long I've been doing stand-up, I say, "Oh, I've been doing stand-up for 7 years." But the reality is that I started doing stand-up in 2001, and I performed stand-up around this town for about 10 months. And at the end of that 10 months, what happened was I performed at the Urban Well, which was the hottest room in town at the time. Like, they had 2 shows on every Tuesday night, an early show and a late show. And I got booked for the Urban Well, and I was really off my game. I started doing my jokes. I was heckled by this woman in the audience, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I'd never been heckled before, and I handled it very badly. I started calling her fat, and she wasn't fat at all. She was a very, very skinny woman, which didn't even make sense. And then these guys behind her started laughing. I was like, these guys are with me, and they're like, they stopped the show. They're like, no, we hate you. We're laughing because this is going horribly for you. And it was like the most shame I'd ever felt. I left the show immediately. I drove home. For the next month, I had 2 shows a week, and I bombed every show. Like, I didn't get a single laugh for the next month. And then I quit comedy for 3.5 years. So that was the worst show that I have ever experienced. And that's why learning to stomach that horrible failure is really, really important, because if I'd been able to do that back then, I would have stuck with it and I would have persevered. But I couldn't handle it back then. I was a young man and I was scared and alone.